Hello folks, Dick Fairburn here. Last week I posted a video talking about the 45-70 lever action rifle I'm taking with me to Wyoming for a bear hunt, a video bear hunt. But if we find that huge grizzly that we want to get on film, if he gets mad, I need protection there. I will be carrying both a bear pistol defense as well as that bear rifle defense. If you want to stick around and get my thoughts on what you need handgun wise for bear defense, hang around. Dick Fairburn here. Today I'm going to talk about handguns for bear defense. Now, when I lived in Wyoming more than 20 years ago, black bears were the things we were most concerned with. There were grizzlies in the Yellowstone National Park, but very rarely encountered outside the park. But after the giant fire they had in 1988, those bears got pushed out into the wilderness areas. For several generations, they'd been living on whatever kind of garbage they could get in Yellowstone National Park, garbage dumps to begin with. And when they closed those down, then they would raid whatever they could from campers or other sources. When they got out in the wilderness and figured out how to eat natural foods, their numbers have exploded. So much so that they really need to institute hunting seasons in Wyoming, probably Idaho, Montana, to make them afraid of man again, because some of them have lost that fear. So in terms of handguns, we need something big enough for a grizzly, and that'll certainly be big enough for a black bear. Now generally, I'm the kind of guy who says more gun, more bullet is the way to go. I'm going to show you smaller versions of what I think will be the best kind of bear defense. Because here's my philosophy. The biggest hand cannon you want to carry with you is probably going to be a Smith & Wesson 500 revolver. And they make some of those things with snub-nosed barrels. I've never fired one of those short barrel 500s, and I don't really want to. I'm not sure we can take a grizzly bear off its feet with raw power and body hits. What you need is precision. You need to hit the brain or the upper spine, the central nervous system, and that's the way you're going to stop that grizzly. So as long as you've got a round that will penetrate deep enough to go through that heavy skull, the muscles of the upper spine, and reach those sensitive targets, if you've got that depth of penetration in a smaller handgun that you can use with more precision, I think that's the way to go. Those hand cannons are very hard to master, and they're very hard to master, especially if you're going to have a follow-up shot. And one shot is not likely to bring this bear down. Unless you hit that magic sweet spot, you may have to fire a flurry of rounds to get it down. So for that, personally, I go with semi-automatics. Revolvers can work, and certainly a lot of them do. Before we get started, I want to talk about where you carry the handgun. I carried a 4-inch 44 Magnum. This happens to be a 41 I borrowed from a friend. But I had a 4-inch stainless steel Smith & Wesson mountain gun for a number of years. That was my, oh my God, bear defense, mountain lion defense when I was in the wilderness in Wyoming. I tried it on a hip holster. That didn't work too well, because when you're slinging a pack, or especially when you're slinging a rifle, it's impossible not to keep bumping into that revolver all the way on a hip holster. Some guys carry low down on the thigh holsters. The SWAT teams like those. I don't really like them because wherever you go, that thing is always wandering around, bumping into the brush and things like that. I tried a crossdraw holster, and that was really one of the best ideas because I normally sling a rifle over here, and it doesn't interfere with the pack so much. I've tried shoulder holsters, both horizontal and vertical. Too many straps, they get in the way. Then I saw the Alaskan chest holster, and I thought, hey, that is out of the way of the shoulder straps. It's out of the way of the rifle. It's where I can get it with either hand. That's a good idea. The problem was, the ones for revolvers used a tension system. You needed two hands to shove it back in, heavy friction. But then it was in place and you could draw with one hand. The ones they made for semi-autos had a strap that went around either behind the hammer or in front of the hammer. And the problem was, if you got a good firing grip, you trapped that safety strap under your fingers. Even if you unsnapped it first, it was likely to get trapped and hamper your draw. No one made the kind of holster I was looking for. Something I can draw with one hand, holster with one hand, it's locked in place for a semi-automatic. So I made my own harness. I bought a Safariland ALS holster and screwed it onto a double heavy piece of leather back here. Now Safariland makes a rig like this, and other places do too with Kydex holsters. So now we have that option available for semi-autos. Draw with one hand, holster with one hand, and it's not going to go anywhere. This is by far, in my opinion, the best way to pack a heavy handgun when you are in bear country. Okay, let's look at revolvers. As I said, a 4-inch 44 was what I carried and what most of my friends carried. This happens to be a 41 Magnum, 44 Magnum, same frame. It's a 4-inch end frame Smith & Wesson. Blue, nickel, stainless, whatever you like. The 4 inchers dropped a little velocity. They gave a little bit more recoil, but they were handier to carry. 6.5-inch barrels, that's fine. If you want a 6.5-inch barrel, that's okay too. A little bit bigger, a little bit more ungainly, but they give you a little bit more velocity if that matters. I killed a mountain lion in Wyoming a number of years ago. I killed it with a 6-inch Model 29, just like this one. What's the downside to revolvers? For me, nowadays, the downside is arthritis. I have arthritis in this thumb joint so badly that if I fire these things with full magnum loads, it about brings me to tears. The ones that are round butt, the newer shaped end frames that'll take a round butt set of Packman rubber grips, I can stand those with light to moderate loads for a while. So I can carry a revolver if I needed to. You got 6 rounds. It's slower to reload, but it's going to be more than enough to do the job. I'm going to talk about ammunition in a little bit, and that's the key to making any of these things work for you. I'll tell you one story, well, a couple stories. When I was out there, one of the big jokes for guys going in bear country was, well, one guy said, all you need is a 38 snub-nosed revolver. And the joke that went along with that was, all you got to do is shoot your buddy in the knee, then you can outrun him, the bear will pick on your buddy. Okay, that's one way. The other theory behind the 38 snub-nose, one guy said in a training class one time, he said, I figure that little 5-shot Smith & Wesson snub-nose is all I need, because when the bear shows up, I'm going to feed him that hand, and when that thing's inside, I'm going to crank off all 5 rounds and I can't miss because I'm inside. Okay, funny stories, not a very practical way to defend yourself against bears. Okay, I started out talking about the 500 Smith & Wesson. It applies to the 460 Smith & Wesson, 454 Casull. All of those really big beast cartridges exact a toll on you in terms of recoil. And in my opinion, they're very difficult to shoot precisely. So use the level of power that you can shoot precisely. The loads I used towards the end when I carried my mountain gun used a heat-treated hard cast bullet. To my notion, there are 2 kinds of bullets, and only 2 kinds of bullets you should take for bear defense. A hard cast, better yet, a heat-treated hard cast, or a solid copper penetrating projectile. Full metal jackets, ordinary full metal jackets. Here's a 9, a 10, and a 45. If you cut these in half, if you section one of these, you will see that the actual copper jacket on there is very thin, just a 7, maybe 8 thousandths in thickness. And a lot of times the core, the lead core that's inside of there, is soft lead, because adding hardeners to lead, more tin or more antimony, costs more money. So the full metal jackets go up the feed ramp well. They're great for training ammunition. They will probably do the job on a close range hit on the skull of a bear, but I wouldn't guarantee it. When we were testing body armor a number of times, I've fired 45 full metal jackets into that body armor, and that bullet mushroomed out substantially. I'll show you a close-up of one. Whenever that bullet deforms like that and gets a wider frontal area, the penetration is severely decreased. So a full metal jacket may work, but it may not on a really big bear. Black bears, probably. Smaller grizzlies, probably. If you're talking about Kodiak bears, brown bears on the Alaskan Peninsula, that's a lot of meat. That's a lot of hard skull bone to get through. I would not trust a normal full metal jacket myself. I would go with a hard lead or a hard, solid copper. Now, I mentioned there's a difference between hard cast and heat-treated hard cast. Hard cast bullets are normally hardened with tin or antimony or both in the alloy. It makes them much harder, it makes them less likely to deform, but if they do hit a really large, hard bone, they can shatter and they can break into pieces, much as they do on a steel plate. The heat-treated bullets have very low antimony, almost none, a little bit of tin, but after they're cast and they're relatively soft, they go through a heat treatment process that hardens it. And it hardens it in a way that it is no longer brittle. So the heat-treated hard cast bullets stand up to deep penetration and heavy bones better than any other lead projectile. The solid copper projectiles come in a couple of different forms. Most of them come from the Lehigh Bullet Company, which was recently bought out by Wilson Combat. They're solid copper. They have some degree of fluting on the nose, although they do make some that are not fluted with a flat tip, and those are probably going to give the best penetration of all. We don't need to penetrate 40 or 50 inches in a grizzly bear. We just need to get through enough muscle and hard skull bone to hit them in the brain or central nervous system, and that'll do the job. We'll show you close-ups of all of these. They're loaded by Underwood ammo. They're loaded by Lehigh used to make their own ammo. I'm not sure if they are since Wilson bought it out. They're also made by Black Hills Ammunition. They call them the Honey Badger line that they have, these all copper projectiles. And they make them in both handguns and for the 4570. The 4570 325 grain Honey Badger, I think, is my best choice for the 4570 carbine that I'm going to carry on this bear hunt. Going beyond revolvers, we're going to step up to full-size autos. And I can tell you that the 44s, who used to be #1 choice for most of my friends in Wyoming, their #1 choice now is a 10mm with a deep penetrating bullet. Generally, probably 75–80% plus of those people, they're carrying either a Glock 20, which is the standard length, or the Glock 40, which is a longer slide. Gives you a little bit more velocity. The Glock is really hard to beat. If you have big hands, that big frame Glock can be a little bit of a handful of you to manage. The short frame helps a little bit. It's still a big pistol. I've chosen 1911s because they fit my smaller hands better. You're going to have to spend more for a good 1911 and 10mm, but I think it's worth it. This particular one, this is hand built by Richard Heine, probably the finest custom 1911 smith there is. At the time I dropped this Colt Delta off for him for a full rebuild, the wait was over 7 years. It took me 7.5 years to get this pistol. You could buy 5 or 6 Glocks for what I have invested in this pistol. None better, but the Glock is a better value. It fits your hand and you can use it. The Glock is very reliable, but so is my 1911. Glock is going to be lighter to carry. I'll tell you another little bear story. This is a number of years ago. A friend of mine in Wyoming had a son who had turned 19 years old. He'd gotten a guide license. All he'd wanted to be since he was a little kid was a hunting guide in Wyoming. So he went through the training, he got the certification, he got a job with an outfitter up in the Cody, Wyoming area, southeast corner of Yellowstone Park. But he knew he needed a bear gun. At 19, he can't go into a dealer and buy it by himself. Maybe that's going to change as we see the Bruin decision filter down into more and more aspects of gun purchases. But his dad could buy it for him. So they went to the gun store and the kid picked out a 10.5-inch Ruger Super Blackhawk 44 Magnum. So this big long cannon was this kid's ideal idea of a bear gun. Well, during hunting season, a hunter had knocked down a pretty good bull way up in the wilderness, and they did what they normally did. They'd gut it, they'd quarter it up, and they'd brush it over to keep the birds off, come back the next morning with horses to pack it out. So the next morning, he and the horse wrangler went back to that location. When they arrived, they could see that some of the brush had been moved. That's not birds. He saw some brown fur ahead, and he didn't know if that was the front end of the elk or what it actually was, which was a mama grizzly with two-year-old cubs. And 2-year-old cub grizzlies are almost as big as their mother. So he's talking about 3 grizzly bears in the 3, 4, maybe 500-pound range. When the bears realized he and the wrangler were coming close, they decided that the elk was theirs, and they were more than willing to fight for it. So they took off chasing these 2 guys. The wrangler made it to a tree. The young guy didn't. Mama caught him. The only serious wounds he had really were 4 bite marks in one of his buttocks, because when he was unconscious, apparently Mama picked him up by the butt and shook him real hard. So there was 4 puncture wounds and a lot of bruising. He was banged up pretty good, but not life-threatening at all. When I heard the story later, when he told it, he said, well, I learned 2 things about my bear gun. First of all, a 10.5-inch barrel on a handgun means when they're laying on top of you, you have to hold this sucker clear out here to get the muzzle against them. Shorter barrel might have been handy. He said the other thing was, that sucker's really slow to reload, that single action revolver. He managed to get it reloaded. The wrangler managed to get out of the tree and get a 300 Magnum off one of the saddle scabbards. They eventually killed all 3 of these bears, and this was before '88. This is before the big outflux of grizzlies from the park. So when a grizzly got killed outside the park, this was a big deal. U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service were all over this. They decided from the burn marks on the carcasses this was clearly a self-defense situation, even though they had 3 dead grizzlies to deal with. The kid learned a lesson. He said, well, I decided that my 10.5-inch single-action revolver wasn't a good bear gun. And I asked him, I said, so what are you looking at now? And he said, I'm thinking a Glock 20 with hard bullets in that 10mm. I got 15 plus 1. It's fast to reload. And I think I can get in there and drill out the brain or the central nervous system with some practice. Okay? He's thinking good. That's the normal best practices for bear country now. A 10mm semi-auto handgun. So I've tested a lot of loads in my 10mm. It's an all-steel gun, so it handles the recoil pretty well. But it is not a ramped barrel. And those of you that know custom 1911s know that the barrels in a 1911 have a ramp, but it matches up with a ramp in the frame. A ramped barrel means all of the ramp is attached to the barrel. That lets them change the angle somewhat and give you a little bit more supported area at the back of the case. These unsupported barrels like this, if they have a really high pressure load, you will see, some people call it a smile, you will see a bulging of the base of the case right over the feed ramp. If it bulges too much, it can blow out. And having blown some out when I was working with 38 Supers a few years ago, when you blow a case in a 1911, it's very exciting. It tends to blow the magazine out and often wreck it. It will probably split the grips, especially if they're wood grips, and it stings like hell on your hand. So it's all around not a good idea. So some of these loads are very heavy. I'm not going to pick on Underwood as any worse or more. I've got a Buffalo Bore here. I do not have a box to show you of double tap ammo, but I have tried their stuff out. The ones that are working at the absolute maximum of the pressure curve, even a Glock will show you that smile and that bulged case from those high pressure loads. Probably the best answer is a aftermarket Glock barrel. They will also work better with cast bullets. You can fire cast bullets through a standard Glock barrel, but the way they're made and the way they're lined inside with the baked on finish, they're going to lead it a little worse. So a lot of lead bullets in a Glock is not a good idea. Glock does not recommend them. I wouldn't worry about a few. But if you're going to shoot a lot of cast bullets, a lot of pure lead bullets in a Glock, you probably need to get that aftermarket barrel. And as I say, they will have a little bit more supported area. They're not as likely to blow out. With a 1911, unless you have a ramped barrel, I would look for the loads that are a little bit lower in pressure. You don't need the pressure, you need to penetrate. And that comes from bullet design, not velocity. Okay, I got out of the heavy revolver business for bear defense, so I don't really have any ammo anymore. When I sold my 44, my friend got all the ammo with it. Revolvers are reliable, they're accurate. If you can get grips that fit you well, it makes a perfectly good bear defense. There are factory ammo, number of factory ammo sources around that use hard cast or heat treated hard cast bullets. Better with a blunt nose. That imports a little bit more shock as it passes through muscle and bone, but most importantly, it tracks straight. Even in Africa, round nose full metal jacket bullets can veer when they maybe just crease a bone or something like that. The flat nose tends to keep them driving straight in to keep the angle that you wanted. So 644s, 41s, and a speed loader, you're okay. How about a 357 with the hard cast bullets? This is the 357 180 grain flat nose. I think they're fine. I think a 357 will puncture in, make that skull shot on any kind of bear, black or brown or grizzly, and it's going to do the job. So I think a 357 would be fine. What about a 38? 38 with a hard cast bullet can penetrate like that. The advantage you have with the magnums, the 357, the 41, the 44, is you are imparting shock as well as penetration. So if you come close enough to the brain, that shock may stun it long enough to get in a good second or third shot. So a little bit of power is not bad, but with the 460s, the 500s, even the line ball cartridges. The line balls are actually pretty easy to shoot in one of his revolvers with the Bisley grip frame, but it's a single action, so you got to cock that hammer every time. It's going to be slow to reload. I would say 44 at the upper end. Now, Smith & Wesson and I believe Taurus both make some lightweight 44 Magnum revolvers. I fired I believe it was a 3-inch Scandium 44 one time with a full 240 grain load. I shot it once. I didn't want to shoot it anymore. Those Scandium revolvers are great to carry, but holy cow, are you dealing with recoil. I think recoil is your enemy when you're trying to precise shot to stop a dangerous animal. My thoughts. So revolvers can do it. If you got one, you're happy with it, and you've got either all copper or hard lead bullets, it'll do the job. It will do its job if you can do your job of delivering the precision hits. What about a 45? Here's a 45 lightweight Commander. Really no heavier than a Glock polymer frame pistol. Packs a 45 punch. This 45 ammo is from Black Hills Ammo. These are honey badgers. Other sources load these same kind of bullets. And I apologize for the wind noise. You never know when it's going to kick up here. They're going to give you damage like a hollow point because of these flutes, but they're going to penetrate straight in because of that solid copper nose, and it will not deform. And any bullet that will not deform is going to penetrate a lot more. 8 and 1, that gives me 9 rounds in that Commander. 8 more with a quick reload. That's a lot of firepower. That's a lot of deep penetration. Now I show you this small one because there's a show on one of the outdoorsman or sportsman's channel, Eastman's Hunting, and I knew we lived in the same town for a few years. I knew some of the Eastman boys growing up. One of their writers was on a full backpack hunt way back in the wilderness on foot. He had killed, I don't recall, a moose or an elk. He was packing out the meat, and anybody who packs that kind of meat out on their back from miles in, I gotta wonder about their sanity in the first place, but that's a whole different video. He had a binoculars chest case, and it had a pouch in the back of it that would hold this pistol. This is the Springfield Armory XDS in 45 ACP. They also make it in 9. In 45, it's 5+1, so this is only 6 rounds, but it fit in his pack very, very well. As he was packing out meat, he heard a noise behind him on the trail. He turned around and he was being charged by a moderate-sized, he said not huge, but a moderate-sized black bear. But it wasn't kidding. It was coming hard. His XDS was loaded with conventional full metal jackets, 230 grain full metal jackets in the 45. He got off one good, accurate shot, hit it right smack between the eyes, and rolled it so that it ended up right at his feet. So the 45 full metal jacket can definitely brain a black bear. Might do all right for a grizzly. I would rather have a harder bullet, but that little pistol and that full metal jacket round worked for him on that day. So a small pistol can do the job. What about a 9mm? A full-size 9mm, maybe a Glock 19, maybe a Glock 48 that I like, which is the size of a 19, but a slimline magazine. With the hard cast bullets, again, made by Lehigh Defense, loaded by Black Hills Ammunition, that bullet is going to penetrate very deep. It's definitely going to go into the brain of the central nervous system of a grizzly bear. So even that little pocket Kimber 9mm could work. I don't think it's the best idea. Personally, I would go with a 10 millimeter. They tend to penetrate more because they're just slightly smaller diameter than the 45. And putting similar weight, similar velocity behind a smaller diameter means even deeper penetration. But with the right loads, I wouldn't be at all afraid to go into bear country with a 45 auto. This is the 10 millimeter. This is a new load by Black Hills Ammo. As I say, there are other companies making them, but Black Hills and I have had a friendship for a number of years. So the 10 millimeter is my choice. The 45 would be my second choice, and I would not feel undergunned at all. As I say, I think you need penetration provided by hard cast or solid copper, and any round from a 9 millimeter up can drill the hole deep enough if you can shoot straight enough. And that's the next thing we need to talk about. I'd like to take a little time to do a little business. First of all, shameless plug for my book, my second book, Building a Better Gunfighter. I have a number of these in paper copy. They are still available on either eBay or on my website at dickfairburn.com. The first book, Police Rifles, is no longer in print, but both of these will soon be out in an ebook format, so you can pick them up that way. I would also like to ask you to please subscribe, ring the little notification bell, and if you like what I'm doing here, give me a thumbs up. That's what helps grow this channel. That's what helps develop more content for you that are interested in what I want to do. So I appreciate it if you could buy the book, if you can subscribe, ring the bell, and give me a thumbs up. Thank you very much. Bear defense with a handgun is a game of precision, not raw power. Even a 500 Smith & Wesson, in my opinion, is not going to take a bear down off their feet with body hits. You need to hit the central nervous system, the brain or upper spine, to fold that bear up immediately. Coming close to one of those targets with a 10, a 45, a big bullet that disrupts more than just its own diameter means you might buy a few seconds. You might stun that bear enough to move, to get off the X a little bit, to get a different angle, and make sure that you hit that brain and put it down for keeps. But the point is, you've got to fire with precision under extreme stress, probably on a moving target. Nobody said it would be easy. Okay, I'm in range safe mode now. Eye protection, hearing protection. I'm ready to go live. Pistols loaded, ready to go. This is a custom built 10 millimeter, as I mentioned before. That's a Colt Delta Elite, built from the ground up by Richard Heine, Quincy, Illinois. When Cooper started the modern technique of the pistol, one of the techniques he taught was called the double tap. Draw, fire 2 pretty quick rounds every time you're going to be in an engagement. The idea was, with 2 rounds, we have a better chance that one of them is going to hit something vital where we need it to. Going beyond that could be wasting ammo, but typically police departments in particular now train to fire for effect. Fire 2, 3, 4 because mostly the pistols have enough ammo. Fire until he stops being whatever it is the bad guy's doing. In this case, a bad bear. A double tap is still a good idea, but be prepared for follow-up shots with a bear. Even if it's down and looks like it's out, you've stepped over that line of killing a federally protected animal, in the case of a grizzly bear or a brown bear. So make sure it's dead. If you have to get off the X, get around to the back of this thing, hit it in the back of the head, the spine between the shoulders, end its suffering as quickly as you can. That's all we can do for the animal. Towards the end of Cooper's era of training modern technique of the pistol, he kind of went away from the double tap. And what he went to is to say, fire a pair, which is 2 controlled shots, a little bit slower pace. We're not going to have perfectly aligned sights, but we're going to catch that flash sight picture. We're going to see that front sight on the target, both shots. 1, 2, kind of in that sequence. I'm at about 10 yards, which to me is going to be bear engagement distance from there on in. If we can do it further out, and you're convinced that this is not a bluff charge, that your life truly is in danger, you want to practice farther out, do so. To me, 10 yards and in looks like where we're going to be doing most of our work. So a pair is 2 controlled shots. A hammer is to draw quickly, get a flash sight picture, and then throw 2 shots as quickly as you can. they're not going to be as close together in a group. They may not be exactly on the target where you want them to be, but if we have a flash sight picture, the first one's going to go, and our muscle memory can often fire that second shot very close to the first. So I'm going to demonstrate a pair and a hammer of 2 rounds. And that's where you need to start your training to be ready with a bear gun. That's a pair. A hammer means he's probably even closer yet. So we're going to pop these off pretty quick. And they're pretty close together. Enough for what we need. Now, if you're going to shoot at a moving target, you know you have to lead it. If you're leading at a charging animal, here's what your brain may not wrap around it. Lead is not left or right in that case. Left is down. As this thing comes closer to you, you're going to have to depress that angle more and more to be able to hit what you're aiming at. I learned this lesson with a Doberman pinscher. When I was a sheriff in Wyoming, we had a lady who lived out in the county who was legally blind. She could see light and dark, and that was all. She had a housekeeper that helped took care of her, and she had a little tiny dog. Got a call to go to her house one day because she had been attacked by 2 Dobermans in the front yard. I just happened to be very close, so I got there within a minute or so. Her caretaker said there were 2 Dobermans, one with a red nylon collar, one with a silver chain collar. They ran up that road. They said they knocked her down, they attacked her little dog, which was clearly about to die, and she said they ran up that road. Well, that road happened to lead to the county landfill. So I drove up there. The Caterpillar operator was burying stuff in the landfill, and I yelled at him, 2 Dobermans, and he said, down in the pit. So I got out with my AR-15. At the time, I was carrying a 3X scope on it. I finally got to the point where the scope went in the briefcase in case I needed it, because most engagements were too close. They were running up out of the pit as I saw them. I got the 3X crosshairs on the first dog, put it down. A little bit of a running shot, maybe a lucky shot, but it worked. As it started to get back up, I hit it again to make sure it was going to be dead. Then I looked for the second Doberman, and I couldn't find it. What I realized was he had gone to my right a little bit, and he was coming straight at me. This dog was charging me as hard as it could run. More than enough justification for me to put this thing down. I hit it on about the 3rd or 4th shot, as my memory tells me. Because it was running at me, I was shooting over it. I put the crosshairs on its head or upper shoulders, but by the time I had pulled the trigger, it had gotten closer and had run underneath my trajectory, essentially. I finally realized that. I went down, put the crosshairs ahead of its nose, tracked it in, hit it right between the shoulder blades, put it down. That's what's going to happen if you're attacked by a bear. You're going to need to lower your angle of aim more and more. What I would suggest is you concentrate on the nose. If the bear is looking at you level, nose is going to take that bullet right into the brain cavity. If it's running at you, if you're aiming at the nose and you don't happen to lead enough, then you're probably going to hit the brain or the upper spine. As I said, nobody said this would be easy. If you have a running target that you can practice at, God bless you. They are few and far between. So to me, all we can do is practice on a static target, be ready to hit a small target under stress while it's moving. That will protect you in a grizzly charge. I'm not going to claim to be a better shot than I am. My old eyes will not focus on the front sight anymore. So I kind of look over my glasses. Both sights are a little fuzzy. It's the best I can do. At close range, it's always been enough. But I can cover those shots with my hand. A pair and a hammer of 2 rounds. Call them a double tap if you like. I think that hand configuration is probably going to cover from the size of a black bear on up. And I have a black bear skull of one I killed, and it in fact is a little bit, the brain cavity is much larger than my hand. A grizzly's going to be bigger yet. These heavy 10s or 45s, 357s, the bigger revolvers, 41, 44, if they're anywhere near, they're going to stun that bear for a little second or so. They're going to give you the time you need maybe to make that more precise shot right on the place. These will work. I'm going to practice a lot more before we leave next week, and hopefully I'll be getting them closer into that circle. This is smaller than the target I need, but that's okay. I'm going to practice small and trust that I can get them in there. This is my idea of bear defense with a handgun. If you differ, put it in the comments. Love to hear what you think. Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah! That's all there is till next time.